Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel discussion titled Ctrl Plus Invest Women Shaping the Future of Cyber Innovation. Our moderator is Lara Habib, Senior Presenter Al Arabiya News Channel. Our panelists are Christopher Steed, CIO and Managing Director, Paladin Capital Group, Dr. Mary Aiken, Chair and Professor of the Cybersecurity Department, Capital Technology University, David A. Hoffman, Steed Family Professor of the Practice of Cybersecurity Policy, Duke University. Lara, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here, and welcome to this panel on women shaping the future of cyber innovation. As you know, women have been breaking stereotypes and making incredible contributions to the cybersecurity startup world, stepping up in what has traditionally been a male-dominated field. But despite these strides, the reality of accessing funding remains challenging. Let me share with you some numbers. In 2023, women-led startups received only 2% of venture capital funding in Europe and the United States. And in the Middle East, the number is even lower. It stands at 0.5%. As this sector continues to grow, creating an inclusive environment is more important than ever. Diversity doesn't just benefit the workforce, it fuels innovation and builds resilience, both of which are crucial for tackling the ever-evolving threats in cybersecurity. So today we're going to dive into how women are shaping this industry, the obstacles they're facing, and what we can all do to support the next generation of women leaders in cybersecurity. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Mary, it's a panel about women empowerment, so I should start my conversation with you. Help us understand, why are we discussing this today? What unique perspectives do women bring to the cybersecurity sector?
Thank you, Lara. So first of all, I would just like to say that it's absolutely fantastic that the GCF places such a focus on female empowerment and women empowerment specifically. And it's great to see that in a whole spectrum of deliverables at this conference. When we look at specific skills and we look at sort of gender-based differences, what we see is that women actually have quite a number of superpowers. Of course, we know this as women. Our job now is to let everybody else know. So what we see is, say specifically in cybersecurity, if we set aside academic qualifications, and here in the Kingdom we see women doing extremely well in STEM, and we see this increasingly worldwide. So the qualifications are there, so that's a sort of an equalizer. And then on top of that, traits that are specifically gender-specific in terms of females in cybersecurity. So first one is attention to detail. So that's incredibly important in, say, data analysis and cybersecurity. The second one is that we see whenever women are on boards, you get better, the research says you get better strategic decision making, you get better risk management because women are very focused on evaluating risk and have good intuitive perceptions around risk. In addition to that, you see high levels of verbal fluency in women, which means that they actually make good leaders and cyber leaders. And then finally, another key trait, which would be a gender-based trait, is their diplomatic skills and empathy. And that can be incredibly important in terms of attracting and retaining talent. So that's just some examples of our superpowers.
Thank you, Mary. Christopher, I know that Paladin is a global investors in cybersecurity startups. Does it really matter to you if the startup is led by a female versus male? And what percentage of your investments goes to female-led startups?
No, absolutely. It is a very important factor when we do look at the nature of the threat. The nature of the threat is incredibly diverse, it's geographic dispersed, and they come up with many different perspectives as to how to target organizations. And so for a cyber-focused investor and a global cyber-focused investor like Paladin, it is a very important factor in our decision making. And so to square a little bit against the industry statistics, and you pointed out one, just in 2023 alone, and the number hasn't changed for a very long time, 2% of all venture-backed startups are women-led. When it comes to cybersecurity, between 10 and 13% of all venture-backed startups are women-led. So orders of magnitude higher, but that's not enough. When you look at Paladin's digital resiliency and cybersecurity investment practice, our numbers when it comes to women-led startups are actually higher than that. However, I think it's also important to broaden the definition. It can't just be women founded. It can't just be women in C-level positions. It's also the employee base. And what we have found is that inside of cybersecurity companies, when you have a more even balance between men and women, it creates the level of benefits that Mary just spoke to, the different perspectives to be able to counter against the nature of the threat. And so for Paladin, there's a couple of reasons why this has come a little bit more naturally to us. The first is our investment focus. In 2001, we created an investment thesis that we believe is as strong today as it was back then, which is focusing on the increasing vulnerabilities to critical infrastructure, particularly by way of rapid digitization of that infrastructure, and then finding dual use and double-clicking on dual use. Dual use products, services, and technologies that make that infrastructure more resilient both at times of crisis as well as at times of rest. Where that points us are those types of entrepreneurs that come out of the government ecosystem, the defense ecosystem, and the intel ecosystem on a global basis. Those environments are inherently more diverse, and for us, when we track our entrepreneurs that are coming out of those environments, it yields a higher percentage of those individuals inside of the companies we invest in being women. And then secondly, when we look at our investment practice, and we model this year after year, what we have seen are those types of companies where women have been in leadership positions. They are able to bring the different perspectives that they have to the table to, again, counter those threats that are incredibly diverse, they're globally dispersed, and it requires those different perspectives to be more nimble in creating those types of solutions that we want to invest in. And so for Paladin, it is incredibly important that we focus on diversity, particularly gender diversity, and it has yielded better results than the broader portfolio as a whole.
But to be realistic, the primary goal of VC funds is to maximize returns. So do you think that returns are better? Or is there a difference between returns of women-led startups versus men-led startups?
So I think the data set is still nascent, and we need to see more VCs actually put women in the investment decision process to be able to fund more startups that are women-led. And as we continue to monitor our portfolio, where you have better gender diversity and a more even balance, we are seeing risk management functions as well as the ability to reach outside of your normal venture funding environment that most male-dominated startups target to be able to get additional funding. And so when it comes to early stage investing, when it comes to venture investing, it is a very risky business. And if you don't have access to the broader ecosystem of financing channels, you don't have access to the level of talent that you want to target in bringing in the right type of people to solve for some of these problems, you're ultimately going to see returns be worse for just those male-dominated companies. And so you have to have that mindset of gender diversity as a best practice. And for some organizations, they have a clear directive, like we have had in the past, where we are putting more women around us from an investment decision standpoint. And that's both at the investment level, that's at our strategic advisory level, and I'll highlight one woman who has now started what is called the Paladin Global Institute, which is a thought leader in bringing policy closer together with this cybersecurity innovation lifecycle. She was the acting cyber director after Chris Inglis, who actually spoke a little bit earlier today. And she brings an entire network that would have not been able to, or that we would have not been able to access and leverage for our investment practice without someone like that. And so what I would point to there is it's not just targeting women-led startups, it's actually employing more women as venture capitalists.
David, if we look at the sector as a whole, the cybersecurity sector, it's a male-dominated sector. Women just constitute 25% of the workforce. So my question to you is, what are the main barriers that are preventing women from entering this sector and thriving in this sector?
Yeah, this makes me think to President Barroso's comments that he made earlier today when he talked about what we need in cybersecurity is global leadership. And I just really first want to thank GCF for putting on this event and putting this topic on the agenda and carrying out the work that GCF's been doing to exhibit that global leadership, because we have a lot of good news to go along with the barriers, as I think was noted on an earlier panel, about amazing senior women who are advancing like Kemba Walden around the world in cybersecurity. But we know that it's not enough. I see this and have the great pleasure of seeing this every day at Duke University, where I teach classes both to computer science students and to public policy students. Many of our leading computer science students who are interested in cybersecurity are women, and actually our national championship cyber team has predominantly been led by women. But that doesn't mean that they're not already facing an uphill struggle and barriers that some of their male colleagues and peers are not. We actually have a program at Duke University where we've been studying this with specific focus on the Latin America region as part of our executive education efforts there. And we've noticed that the barriers actually need to be split out, we think, into three different categories. I call them the 3 S's of advancing to careers in cybersecurity. So they're starting, they're staying, and they're succeeding. And they break out differently. And so I think, and the measures we have to take to alleviate them are different. From a starting perspective, as I think was noted earlier today, what's incredibly important is that young women, as they're growing up, see other women who are being successful. People like Professor Aiken, like Kemba Walden, who are doing this at the highest level. And now we have women who are doing that. We need to get them out and visible to young women while they are in school so they can see that. We need to move education of cybersecurity down into the high school level around the world, and to make sure that that's not just to students who have a natural interest in science and math necessarily. That's great, but we need to be reaching out to people who are interested in a variety of disciplines and showing them that cybersecurity can be a fantastic career. Once we get to the staying aspect, once women have decided that cybersecurity is, as my friend Brian Pralmo, the CEO of Trellix, says, soulful work that makes a huge positive addition to the world, then I think the question is, are there barriers to them staying working in cybersecurity? And we see that some of this is cultural, depending upon country, but we see some pretty significant barriers, that there are times in life where women bear disproportionate loads than men do, particularly around the care for others. And this is not just the care for children, but also oftentimes in many cultures, the care for their parents and their grandparents and older citizens. Having structures in place so we can make sure that women can continue on with their careers while also providing those roles that are important and meaningful to them in society and getting the right level of support, while also men are also helping to provide assistance in those roles, is absolutely critical. I think the other thing about staying is a real focus on having an inclusive environment where it's a healthy place to work. And so not making it so that women are always faced with obstacles in the workplace where there are barriers on a daily basis for them trying to get their work done. The last I would say is what we call succeeding. For succeeding, we mean now at the highest level, getting up to be the CEOs of cybersecurity companies, being on boards of these companies. This is absolutely critical. What we think is really necessary there is mentoring from both men and women, people who have faced the same problems that those women are going to find. What we see in a lot of countries is the most successful women have actually advanced quicker in their careers often than many of their male counterparts. That may mean that sometimes they don't have some of the experiences to draw from some of the negative experiences that they might face. Getting them the right level of mentoring from other senior executives, other members of boards to help them make that transition is incredibly helpful and useful.
Thank you. Dr. Mary, what are your thoughts here? Where are the barriers? Do you think it is access to funding? Do you think it's related also to biases from societies, that this is a male-dominated sector?
I think that there are, in the literature, you see that women can miss out in terms of technical skills, in terms of early education and getting them into STEM. They can miss out in terms of the network, the boys' club, the golf club, to actually help further their career informally outside of the organization. And I think, for me, I think the greatest barrier is the psychological one, because you can overcome those other barriers. And I think the psychological one is about confidence, is actually feeling that you can do a job. So we know in industry, when a job is advertised and say it's the head of a department, you'll get a man looking at that job and thinking, I can do that. You'll get a woman looking at that job and questioning whether she can do it or not. So it's about confidence, but also I think that when we try to solve a problem, so we're trying to solve this problem of, we want to get more women into cybersecurity, we want to get more founders into cybersecurity. In medicine, when you're approaching a problem, the caveat is first do no harm. So I think when we're trying to address this problem of, female empowerment in cyber contexts, what we want to make sure is that there isn't an unintended consequence, and that in fact we might be making the problem worse. And I'll explain why that is, because for the young women in the audience, starting their careers, starting their academic careers, their studies, getting into industry, I don't want you to think, before you even start to be the best that you can be, that you're at a disadvantage. That puts up a big psychological barrier, and that goes for any sort of minority group. To think that there are problems, to think that there are obstacles, that can actually make you hold back. And sometimes maybe the more we talk about women having a terrible time and being discriminated against and not being successful, maybe we're compounding the problem. I think, when David talked about role models, I'm a woman, clearly, and I work in male-dominated sectors. So technology sector, I work with police, I work with military, I work in higher levels of academia. And for me, the way that I have succeeded is that when I am doing anything, I don't think about myself as a woman. I don't look at a complex project or write a paper and think, how do I do this as a woman? I know quietly that I have great skills and that in some areas I'm going to be better than, a guy or a man on a particular topic. But I don't have a construct of gender. I have a construct of performance. So my message to the women in the audience and to the men in the audience who are trying to sort of encourage women in their own organizations is to put performance first. When I'm writing an academic paper, nobody cares if I'm wearing lipstick and heels. It's about the paper. It's about the science. And that's one way to overcome the confidence gap, the psychological restraints, is to believe that you're good at what you do and to believe my gender is not my problem. It's somebody else's problem, and I'm not going to make it my problem.
Dr. Mary, some believe that the issue here is really in the psychology of women, given that it's not about only that the venture capitalists, they don't want to invest in women-led startups. It's about women voicing less their ambitions compared to men. Yeah. It's about women asking for finance less compared to men. Do you agree on that?
So there's two psychological syndromes that I can talk about that will answer that. So the first syndrome is called imposter syndrome. And that's where you actually are very well qualified, very able, could do the job, and you don't feel that you're good enough, despite all the evidence. And women suffer more from imposter syndrome than men. And effectively, when it comes to asking for money and convincing a guy like Chris, and somebody like Chris is going to be tough in the room because he's investing money and he wants to get the best result. And if you have somebody sitting there suffering from imposter syndrome type tendencies, immediately for the VC guys, they're going to be, well, if this person doesn't believe they can do the job, why should I believe and trust them with the money? Then there's an opposite effect. And it's called the Dunning-Kruger syndrome. And the Dunning-Kruger syndrome is a psychological syndrome which you don't have the technical qualifications, you're not very talented, but you believe that you're the best at something. And the thing is, with Dunning-Kruger, more men have the Dunning-Kruger effect than women. So they're more confident, so they end up pitching to a VC, and they can say, I can do this, give me the money, I'm brilliant at what I do, I will give you 5x return on your capital. So you can look at those extremes, and it comes back to the same psychological variable. It's about self-belief. So I think our mission and challenge is, how do we overcome that? How do we get women to punch above their weight, to go for the big jobs in the same way that a man will do? And how do we make sure that by talking about the topic, we're not actually making the problem worse by convincing women that they're not successful, that it's going to be hard, and that's demotivating.
So let's talk about solutions. One of the things that David mentioned is the importance of networking. How about solutions when it comes to financing? And can new ways of financing, including crowdfunding, be the solution to this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the environment for LP commitments, so limited partner commitments, who are investors in firms like ours, has focused largely on things like ESG as an additional directive alongside making money. What we want to see are those types of LPs, particularly from sovereign funds, from large corporate environments, that enforce the same types of methodologies on their general partners to actually enforce that as they take a look at making those investments. And Mary, you make a very, very important point. That the psychology of women entrepreneurs needs to change by way of mentorship, by way of connecting, by way of looking at success stories. But the psychology of the investor also needs to change. And what you will find in many male-dominated venture capitalists and private equity shops is they will ask very different questions to female-led companies versus male-led companies. They will ask the female-led companies, how will you deal with adversity when adversity approaches you as a company or as a leader of the company in trying to build your business, versus the question they'll ask a man, which would be, how do you take your company from $1 to $20 million of revenue?
That's true.
And so those biases in the investors themselves must yield more LPs that are focused on funding female-led VCs, either through crowdfunding projects. Microfinancing is a big topic that we focus on. Those types of venture capitalists that will go out and they will invest in 100 female-led startups, hoping that 1, 2, maybe 3 of them grow up so that the rest of the venture capitalists can then approach them and then actually put money in them to help them grow. And I think it's also important to touch upon the point that you made that there's only 25% penetration of women in cybersecurity. Well, there's also 3.5 million unfilled jobs in cybersecurity. So there is a massive gap to be filled, and until we get that number up from 25%, we're not going to fill those 3.5 million unfilled jobs. And so I think it's incumbent on both LPs as well as venture capitalists to change the nature of how they approach a woman-led business. And I think it's also important that more female-focused VCs, microfinancing projects, and crowdfunding come to the forefront to specifically target those types of businesses. Because when it comes to women as startup founders, we find that because the academic environment inside of STEM is male-dominated, because the professional ecosystem inside of STEM is male-dominated, they've actually had to go through more barriers. They've had to jump over more hurdles to get to where they are. And when we fund businesses, we acknowledge that starting a business, it's difficult. Starting a cybersecurity business is really difficult. And so we want to invest in resilient people. And so when we think about it from that perspective, it's a whole of ecosystem approach to changing the mindset as to how we approach financing these companies.
David, thank you, Christopher. David, quickly to you. One thing we haven't highlighted much is the role of the government. What should the role of the government be through tax incentives, through programs? What are your thoughts here?
Sure, I think there are a lot of things that the government could do, but I'd like to focus on 2 that I think are most important. And the first comes from my experiences here in the kingdom. Specifically, I was here in Saudi Arabia in August and had the great opportunity to go up to KAUST, to King Abdullah Science and Technology University. And they ran a program for the summer that Duke University participated in where they isolated the top 200 science and math students in the kingdom and then had them work on projects throughout the summer. And so we were reviewing their final projects, and one group of 5 women did a cybersecurity in the renewable energy sector project that I continue to think is absolutely brilliant. And when I was talking to them about it, I said, how many venture capital companies have you talked to about this project? And they said none. They said, we don't really have access as college students here in the kingdom to that kind of community. And I said, well, then I think that is something that the government could step in. And I think governments in general could come in and talk early about how to be entrepreneurs, how to do innovation, how to start companies, how to seek funding. And it's not just the funding, but it's also the value-added guidance that a company like Chris's company can provide with bringing in the CEOs from their other portfolio companies who've seen all of these challenges before, and then therefore they can be the mentors. That's one of the 2. The second is, I think, in general, going through a transition of government seeing themselves as regulators of technology. Instead, now government is more seeing themselves as collaborators with companies in the area of technology. I think one thing we've seen with that in a variety of countries is the idea of shared services, developing certain cybersecurity services and or IT services that companies then can use within that country. I think providing those kinds of services to help young women become entrepreneurs in cybersecurity or to work in cybersecurity, access to those kinds of services is what government ought to be doing.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up. If you may allow me, I would like to end this panel on one note. When women lead, innovation will follow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.